Good afternoon, everybody. My name's Brett Martin. My day job is as a consulting systems engineer with Cisco Meraki. I've been with Cisco for just over 10 years. So I've just got my non-stick casserole dish, which is your 10-year anniversary gift. Very exciting. As I said, I was asked a couple of weeks ago if I could do this. I've put together a presentation really around the all-wireless office, and I guess my take on is it possible, and if so, sort of how do we do it? So some of the bits and pieces that we're going to go through, just a little bit of context around what I'm seeing from my customers. So I will sort of fess up right at the beginning that my day job isn't designing and managing a wireless network as Elizabeth's is. So my experience is very much from a vendor perspective, working with customers who are designing and operating wireless networks. So I guess I'll put that caveat in right at the beginning. I'm going to use the example of Cisco IT, however, because I think they're a really good example, or we're a really good example of a large organization that is going all wireless where we can. So I'm going to talk about some design top tips and things to consider, but most importantly, conscious that I am the only thing between you and lunch. So I will try and keep it concise. So first of all, a bit of context. These are all images of Cisco Meraki offices, actually. So we are very much re-engineering our workspace to be much more open plan, much fewer assigned desks, really looking to change the workspace around the way that we're all working nowadays. So I guess all of us in this room would be classed as knowledge workers. We're all employed because we know something, hopefully. It's all about our employers. What they're really looking to achieve, I guess, is a bit more productivity out of us. And one of the ways that we're doing that is by sometimes keeping us in the office a little bit longer, but making our time in the office more efficient. So the way that Cisco are doing that are kind of zoning our offices into different spaces where we can go and get our head down and study and read something in peace and quiet. We've got more collaborative spaces where you can have more sort of informal conversations with colleagues, and then more formal spaces where you're going to have meetings. So we're much more mobile inside the office. And this isn't, I count myself being very lucky working in this kind of environment. It's a really nice place to work, but we're certainly not unique. This is a trend that we're seeing across a lot of my customers are looking to sort of office of the future kind of projects. So obviously it means that Wi-Fi has become a lot more critical. So it took me all of about 2.5 minutes of Google image searching to find a few of these. But I guess it just shows how ingrained Wi-Fi has become in popular culture, in our everyday lives at home and at work. So it's a lot more critical to what we're all doing, not just us lot in this room who are passionate about Wi-Fi, but to everybody it's something that is top of their mind. And another point that Elizabeth made, I think that was a great one, is that people's perception of the network or people's perception of Wi-Fi is that that's the network, that Wi-Fi equals internet. If Wi-Fi is crap, then the internet's crap. It's all gone wrong. Quite often that's people's perception. This is quite funny. So I was involved in the Cisco Live network, I guess 3 or 4 years ago when it was in London. So for any of you who've not heard of it, Cisco Live is a large trade show, moves around Europe and to different destinations. It was in London for 3 years. So I was involved in the team that we basically stood up a temporary network for about 8,000 people in the Excel Centre, which is an enormous effort that goes in, then a 3-day event, and you rip it all out again, and it's a little bit disheartening at the end of it. But this is people's expectation. They wanted Wi-Fi absolutely everywhere, and were disappointed when it wasn't. So moving on to Cisco IT, and what do we do? What do we do internally? So we've been kind of going on this journey to re-engineer our workspace, re-engineer the physical offices in Cisco. And this is a project we've called Connected Workspace. Now, this is a little bit different in the US from Europe. So thankfully in Europe, we've not had those horrible kind of cubes that you see, the kind of 6 foot or 8 foot cubes that I think would just drive me mad. It's been much more open plan in Europe for a number of years, but certainly in the US, they're really looking to remodel those environments, make them much more like the pictures that we saw on the very first slide. And these are some of the stats. I mean, this is a really interesting project. And I mean, bear with me. I know this is we're talking about Wi-Fi, and I'm talking about spending money on furniture, but we will get there. So a reduction, 55% reduction in furniture costs, 55% reduction in cabling and infrastructure costs, reduced power consumption, increased density of users, so 30% less floor space per person, at the same time as making it a more effective place to work. So this is a pretty cool, pretty successful project all in, really. So from an IT perspective, I just want to delve into a little bit more detail now around how we've dealt with that from a wireless perspective. Just to give you a bit of a view of what Cisco IT are dealing with, we are obviously a large organization. So we're at the sort of upper end of the scale, I guess. We've got 74,000 employees, 136,000 people all in by the time you add in contractors and various other stakeholders. But I think what we're going to talk about, a lot of that is relevant to businesses of other sizes as well. But just to give you a bit of a view, 6,500 switches, 5.8 billion DNS requests every day, 200,000 connected end-user devices. So we are it's a large IT organization trying to keep everyone online. So if we look at the devices that we're using, we have a BYOD policy for mobile. It's in the UK, that's kind of a stipend type model, so you can get an iPhone SE free of charge, or if you want a better device, then you can top that up, which most people do. We're very Apple-centric, so as you can see, out of the 65,000 mobile devices, 42,000 of those are iPhones. On the laptop side, we are increasingly moving towards Macs, so around 43,000 Macs in the estate, which is up from about 30,000 a couple of years ago. So that's what our device estate looks like. But that's not everything. So if you look at everything else that we've got here, 134,000 IP handsets, 23,000 desktop video units. A lot of those are with home users. So if you tot all this up, it's actually about 400,000 devices connecting to our network. 200,000 of those are end-user devices. So it's about half and half by the time we look at all devices connecting to the Cisco network. So what's the strategy of Cisco IT? Very much wireless as primary connectivity. So what I mean by that is that those end-user devices that we saw, our strategy is absolutely to be connecting those devices to the network via wireless. You've got the choice, so typically you will have Ethernet going to the desk because typically there'll be an IP handset on that desk. But we are certainly deploying fewer hardware phones out to those environments. The one thing that is quite interesting, though, is that 9 times out of 10, that cable run is still put to that desk. The cost of removing it is prohibitive. So there's very little value in pulling that cable out. So we leave the cable in situ when we're refreshing those environments.
But if you built a new office, would you put that cable in?
Not necessarily, no. So we're still deploying hardware phones as a rule, but there are fewer of them. So really what I want to talk about is that a lot of the strategy here has to depend on what you're doing from a collaboration perspective. If you do have a strategy of putting a phone on every desk, then it probably makes sense that device is cabled in. So the Cisco IT strategy is really around employee choice. So we have people who are going to prefer to use a hardware phone. We're going to have people who prefer to use a soft phone. They're all about making us happy, productive employees. So they want to offer the choice to us so that we can log into that hardware phone or not, depending on what you're doing. So you've got the freedom to choose either a personal video unit, a larger screen, or up to like an immersive video unit, sort of the telepresence type devices where you have a dedicated room. So what we are finding is that certainly the team that I work in is very geographically diverse, in that I work with people from all over the country. So the way that we handle that is that we have an increasing number of smaller meeting rooms, but with video units. So rather than having meeting rooms for 10, 12, 15, 20 people, we split those up to have lots more sort of 6-person meeting rooms with decent video units in them, so you can pull people in from remotely. So looking at this from a wireless perspective, we've got around 10,000 APs globally. It's all controller based, based on Wave 111 AC. So as I mentioned at the beginning, I'm part of the Cisco Meraki business unit. So we are focused on cloud managed networking, and all of the Meraki offices are based on Meraki technology, but we are 3 buildings out of 600. So the rest are all controller-based, sort of traditional Cisco wireless kit. Talking about SSIDs and being more efficient with your SSIDs, we have 2 globally. So we have, well, actually that's a slight lie. We have 3 globally. So Blizzard. We have Blizzard and we have Blizzard Legacy. So we have Blizzard, which is 5 gigahertz only, Blizzard Legacy, which is 2.4 gig only. So the default is that you use Blizzard, and all of the corporate provided devices now, and for a number of years, have 5 gig capability. So we use Radius in the background to then subdivide our network. So rather than having one SSID equals one VLAN, one SSID plus Radius means that you can then push various different policies, an ACL on a controller or a group policy in Meraki land, and this is fairly vendor agnostic, I guess, so that's going to be supported for a lot of other vendors' kit as well. But that means you can then subdivide your network. You can give user A a different experience on the network from user B, but they're both connected to the same SSID, much more efficient from an RF perspective. From an authentication perspective, it's all based on MS-Chat v2, so Active Directory username and password, single sign-on across all services inside Cisco. So hopefully, not many people have the opportunity to forget their password because they're putting it in multiple times a day, generally. And then we have an internet SSID, which is open with a web auth splash page. So those are really, so Blizzard and internet are our 2 SSIDs. Blizzard Legacy is the one that's kind of snuck in there recently because we've dropped 2.4 support from the main SSID. The strategy is very much around location services and how we can get a bit more data about how we're using our office space using location services. So this is the new corporate standard, is having location services enabled. So what I want to get onto now, that's what we're doing from a Cisco IT perspective. What I want to get onto now is a bit more sort of general, my thoughts on the world of the all wireless office. And I think one of the key messages that I want to get across is, are you looking to design an all wireless office, or are you looking to design an all wireless user experience? Now, what I would see as the difference between the two is that an all wireless office is where every single device is wireless, so a printer, a desk-based phone, a video unit, an access point even, meshing back to another access point. We're really trying to do away with Ethernet as much as we possibly can. Or are you trying to enable people the freedom to move around the office in a more seamless kind of way? And I would say, actually, 9 times out of 10, what we're looking to achieve is probably the latter. Which brings us really onto, I guess, one of the other key points I want to get across is that if it doesn't move, then plug it in. So it's really a question of capacity. So we all know that wireless is a finite resource. As much as we've improved the standards, 11AC is much more efficient than 11N. We're still at a point where, in the vast majority of cases, it's a half duplex hub that's hanging off your ceiling, and it's a shared medium. So if you want the maximum capacity, then it makes sense for those immobile devices to be plugged into Ethernet to free up airspace for those devices that really need wireless. And we're seeing an increasing number of devices joining the network that are static. So if you're looking at IoT type sensors, this I think is really cool. I don't know if you can see that very well, but Philips have come out with an LED carpet. So you can have, in this example, it's showing if the meeting room's free or busy, but imagine that in an airport environment where it's guiding you to a different gate to say flight BA 123 in this direction, sir, which is pretty cool. This is another one. You're always going to have some Ethernet. You're always going to be putting a switch within 100 meters of an access point. So yes, you're going to be deploying fewer switches, but you've probably already got those wiring closets in place. You're going to have to be deploying Ethernet somewhere. So why not cable in those fixed devices? So as I said at the beginning, if you look at the Cisco IT example, 50% of our devices are not end-user devices. So it really doesn't make any difference if that IP handset on the desk is wireless or wired to me. It doesn't make any difference from an end-user experience perspective, but it certainly does make a difference from a network capacity perspective. I think that's about all I was going to say on that one. So just because you can doesn't mean that you should. So just because it's perfectly feasible to wirelessly enable that printer or that desktop phone and put a wireless bridge on something if it doesn't have wireless support, then yes, you can do it, but why do it? What's the business benefit of you doing that? So a couple of things just to consider, some of my sort of general ramblings. Think about who your stakeholders are. So if you think sort of holistically about these projects, as we saw in those pictures right at the beginning, this is generally going to be a much broader effort than just IT. So certainly in Cisco, HR are involved in that. This is part of a much broader sort of flexible working policy. We've actually merged in Meraki now, we've merged our sort of workplace resources facilities team with our IT team into what we're calling a digital workplace team. So really, it's now looking holistically about what that employee's experience is in the office, be it sitting in front of their laptop and what their digital experience is and what their physical experience is in the office space. And this is increasingly common. If you Google Vodafone's better ways of working, and this isn't a project I was involved in, it's just something that I was aware of kind of on the periphery, and there's quite a lot of information about it. They very much redesigned their office space around wireless and talking about this in a very much in the way that this is helping their business with their employees being much more mobile inside the office, which has meant they're able to have 200% occupancy in their headquarters in Newbury. So they've got twice as many people assigned to that office as they have physical space. So what that means is that remote workers are in scope of their project as well. So it's not just about how you make those workers more mobile inside the office space, it's about how you enable them to be productive outside of the office. So what does that experience need to look like? Is client VPN good enough, or should you be looking at teleworker type devices so that in Cisco world, we've got something called CVO, Cisco Virtual Office. So we've got about 30,000 users using CVO, where we've got Blizzard and the corporate SSIDs at home. So it makes that experience far more slick. You then got instant access to all of your applications without having to fire up a software VPN. So it's those kind of things that actually if any of you are involved in kind of securing budgets for doing wireless networks properly, then it's these sorts of things that might help you get the finances, get the funds to properly resource a site survey, to properly resource funding the kit, and especially things like this. So Vodafone saved £3 million a year just by the reduction in ads, moves and changes because people weren't assigned a physical desk anymore. So that can really help to free up a bit of cash to do something with on the wireless side. So RF design is very conscious coming into this, looking at the list of speakers that you've got in front of you today, that there are people far more qualified than me to talk about RF design. So all I'm going to say is it's important and listen to your... So, yeah, I mean, it is, don't take it for granted, I guess. It is absolutely getting that layer one correct is going to be the way to make it a successful project. If you don't get that right, and I guess talking about the interference, you've got to. It's no good relying upon. It's what was my train of thought there? Yeah, it's no use relying upon things like the spectrum analysis built into your infrastructure to steer around sources of interference if they're still there. By far the best way to do that is to find it and go and turn it off and get rid of it. The gentleman over here had a question around how would you design wireless for this room. So I thought I was just tweaking my slides, sitting at the back there, and I remembered I'd taken this photo last year at one of the Cisco events. So this is how we do it. So this was our sales kickoff event. So it was about 18,000 people across Las Vegas, and this was one of the sort of very busy walkways. So we have an AP that supports external antenna, which we then put this is about a 60-degree directional patch antenna, or a dual band directional patch. So just on the subject of RF design, I thought I'd drop that in there. Looking at quality of service, so it's worth giving a thought to how you're going to handle QoS across your wireless network. So especially if you're rolling out soft phones, then what does that device, what QoS markings does that device put on that traffic as it leaves the device? Is that correct? So things like iOS devices are terrible for that. Real-time traffic is always going to be deprioritized over FaceTime, for example, unless you do something clever. So does the client mark that traffic correctly? If it doesn't, can you create a policy inside your infrastructure to remark that traffic and to mark it accordingly? So something that's worth thinking about. Availability. I wanted to share with you a quick story about this, actually. So one of my customers is a large manufacturer in the UK that isn't JLR. And they were trying out some bridge technology. So they were using some Meraki access points to build a wireless bridge. And they're having a few challenges, and they'd opened a support case, and things weren't moving along quite as quickly as they would like. And we got it resolved pretty quickly in the end, by the way. It wasn't a major issue, but at the time, sort of in the thick of it, I'd made a suggestion or something they could try. Basically got a very sharp email back saying, yes, Brett, well, we'll take your suggestion so long as you promise that if this particular building in this manufacturing plant goes offline, that you will fund the entire cost of us not being able to produce that equipment. Now, clearly, we've sold them a couple of APs. Now we're liable for millions of pounds worth of... So the question I had was, why on earth are you connecting this mission-critical building to the rest of your environment via a wireless bridge? As reliable as wireless is, it's still very possible to disrupt that connection either maliciously or accidentally with some pretty basic technology. You don't need anything very sophisticated to be able to interrupt it. So think about it. If wireless is really the only method of accessing the network, then what happens if it isn't there? And to some people, it doesn't really matter at all. They just flick on their, tether their phone to their laptop and they're away again. But in some environments, that's not the case. That's going to have much more of an impact. Things like support. So wireless is becoming much more critical. What happens if your device blows up? What happens if a crack vulnerability comes out, but you're not eligible to download the new software to patch that vulnerability? Those kind of things. So another thing that's worth thinking about. From a control plane perspective, have you built in redundancy? Have you got redundant controllers in the environment? Have you properly architected it if you're running a controllerless type architecture where the control capability sits on the AP? Do you understand how that kind of election process works in the event that your kind of primary AP fails? Radio resource management. Have you got that turned on to enable things like coverage hole detection if a device, if an AP falls over? Has your infrastructure got the ability to boost power from those surrounding APs to fill that gap? So these are all kind of things that are worth thinking about when wireless becomes more critical and availability becomes more important. Really one of the closing points I wanted to just finish up on was around location services. So I guess a lot of us in this room are very likely to be aware of Wi-Fi location services, and maybe that's, you think, oh, it's great for a hospital or great for retail. What we're seeing actually is a trend towards using this data to understand office space utilization. So this is a partner, it's completely unrelated to Cisco, but I think they're doing something quite interesting, a company called Refinity, and they're basically taking location data in from wireless, smashing that all together with badge scan data and various other sources of data to then report back on actually how well utilized is that office. So yes, I've got 65% of my people badge into the office every day, but actually, because it's a flexible environment now, the peak utilization is only 50%. And if I look at the average utilization of that space, it's 35%. So why on earth am I funding an office that can house all of these people when actually what we probably need to be looking at is an office that's a lot smaller. So I guess coming back to the stakeholders, this is information that can be very interesting to the facilities team, to workplace resources, and they might not even be aware that these kind of things are possible, but they might be able to help fund your project. So just some thoughts really that I think location services is becoming much more relevant in a broader number of spaces. So can I really build an all wireless office? In closing, yes, you absolutely can. But generally I would say it's probably not advisable. So if it doesn't move, plug it in, I think is my general rule of thumb. You can definitely save money by moving down that route. So certainly reduction in switches and cabling can absolutely be achieved. Moving to a wireless as primary without wireless only, you can still reduce the number of cables that you're running. And I think the soft benefits of that are many. I think we've got, it makes for a much nicer environment if everybody can be a bit more mobile. From a brownfield perspective, if you're upgrading an existing access layer, then you've already invested in that cabling. Don't bother pulling it out. It's there. It's not going to make any difference if it stays there. But you probably will realise a cost saving at the point that you go to refresh your switches, because you're probably going to need fewer of them. And don't forget to do a decent survey. So my closing slide, I guess, a little bit cheeky, but this is what I'd like to leave you with.